Okay, Mr. Kittredge, welcome.
Thank you for hearing my testimony today.
Make sure that button is up.
Up. There you
Okay.
go. Yep.
I'm here to oppose this bill because it is against the interests of the people of Rhode Island. I appreciate the members of law enforcement and the bill sponsor with their intent not to, pick sides or have this used against any one side of the spectrum. Unfortunately, where these laws matter is not in their intention when they are written. It is in the material impacts when they are actually passed. And these measures have been passed in several states, and they have had chilling effects on protests. And the idea that these are passed as a neutral arbiter is additionally undermined by the fact that we have leaked emails from the police departments in Portland and New York, where members of these police departments were liaising and working with members of these far right-wing groups to give them information on where they had intelligence on where left-wing protesters would be, and to allow them into these areas without searching them for weapons so that they could engage in violence against these protesters. These are not neutral bills in their effect, even if they are in the intention of the people that propose them, which I do not question. These bills specifically, again, while they are not intended to suppress one side of this argument, they still have that effect because, as Steve mentioned, the violence level on the two sides of this spectrum is all on one side. It's all on the far right. And we have numerous occasions of people being doxxed at these protests on the left, and then subsequently facing violence and harassment. Specifically, there was a recent sting operation by the FBI where they arrested members of the far-right neo-Nazi terrorist group, the Base, who were planning on attacking and murdering two people who were identified on one of these far-right wing dox lists. This is not a hypothetical situation. This is what anti-fascist protesters are facing every day. There are murderous right-wing terrorist groups who use the information revealed by people being unmasked in areas with these laws to create kill lists in order to attack members of anti-fascist organizations. There is no equivalent on the left. There is no violent, murderous left-wing group out there being arrested by the FBI for plotting horrifying attacks on members of, I don't know, the Republican Party or some other right-wing organization. Additionally, I can also attest, as Steve did, to having been at many protests in the past and seeing numerous occasions, both in Providence and in Boston, where police were not hindered in any way by detaining, in their attempts to detain and arrest members of the public at these protests who were wearing masks. The simple wearing of a mask to hide one's identity from these demonstrably violent, murderous right-wing extremists in no way prevents the police from detaining or arresting anyone. I have seen dozens and dozens of people wearing masks detained and or arrested by police at these protests. So the idea that we have to have this sort of a law in order for the police to do their job of attempting to keep the peace, again, I understand the intent, and it's totally valid. I'm not impugning anyone's intentions here, but we know that's not true. This bill is not necessary to allow the police to do their job and protect people when violence breaks out. Having been at many protests that at some point or another turned violent, I can tell you there's nothing that has ever prevented the police from moving in once violence occurs, if that's what they want to do. Additionally, I would just bring up that, as has been mentioned by others here, multiple times, white supremacists and neo-Nazis have attempted to use this building and the lawn around it to rally people to their cause. And it was only the actions of members of this community that showed up to oppose them that prevented them from really having any ability to spread their message of genocide against anybody who isn't white. And this sort of a law will, whether it has that intent or not, it will depress turnout for these events and prevent people from showing up and executing their constitutional right to oppose fascism. Additionally, I would mention that it is a rather ironic double standard that this bill is going through the legislature at the same time as another bill is going through trying to add correctional officers to the list of folks who are allowed to have extra tinted windows. So at the same time that we are being told that as members of the general public, we are not free to exercise our right to privacy, but that members of law enforcement or correctional officers, people who are paid by the state, people who are supposed to be putting in the interest of everyone in the state, that they need to have those privacies, that those rights are important for them, but they are not important for the rest of the general public. And that, to me, is a pretty dangerous double standard. And I will just close with this, that the Senate Judiciary Committee, just barely 9 months ago, passed a resolution condemning white supremacy and neo-Nazism, and I applaud the body for doing that. But all the general public is asking now is that you actually, try and uphold the intent of that resolution and allow the people of Rhode Island to show up and express their views and be able to do so without being worried about being put on a terrorist kill list, which is exactly the sort of thing that people will be worried about if this bill passes. Thank you.
Representative Corvée.
I respect your opinion, but I have to say one thing. Sometimes, both on the right and the left, we see things that aren't there. And you just alluded to the fact that you found it interesting or curious, whatever words you used, that this bill is being forwarded at the same time the tinted window bill is. I can assure you, and I'd like to think for the most part, even my enemies trust my word, that not only does this bill have nothing to do with tinted windows for anyone, I personally, since I'm the prime sponsor of this bill, don't support those other bills. So one has nothing to do with the other. You can either believe me or not, but trust me, when I put this forth, it was not with some conspiratorial notion of another bill being put forth at the same time. The two have nothing to do with each other, and quite frankly, and I haven't said it publicly, I might as well say it now, I don't think those bills for the tinted windows are appropriate, because if you're going to do it for one person, you should do it for everyone.
Any further questions for Mr. Kittredge?
May I briefly respond to that?
Sure.
Okay. I'm glad to hear that you don't support the tinted windows bill, Representative. I just would like to clarify, I wasn't trying to imply there was some conspiracy to put these two bills in at the same time. I was simply pointing out the similarities in that we have one bill expressing that there should be one set of privacy laws for a specific group of people, and this bill attempting to take away privacy rights in a different manner from a different group of people. I understand that there's no grand backroom conspiracy to put both bills out, just simply pointing out a similarity. Thank you.
Representative Knight, did you have a question?
I think it's worth pointing out. I appreciate your passion, and I know you were in the room when I spoke before. I think it's a complicated issue. I do think it's worth pointing out, though, that when we know that there are police departments in this country that misbehave and engage in conduct that is, I don't know how to say it. I mean, it's despicable, right? We know that happens out there, but I think it's important to know, because your testimony had a piece of that, is that those are the outliers, right? In a country of 350 million people with many thousands of police forces that are operated in a top-down fashion, but are their own little worlds, their own little towers. Some of them are going to be bad, but I think overall, most of them operate well and professionally. And then I think in Rhode Island, and I am a criminal defense lawyer and a former prosecutor, been in the business for almost 20 years. The misconduct that you speak of, I've never seen or experienced in Rhode Island, and I think it's worth having that on the record. The interesting thing about the decision that I just read and some of the other decisions that I read up to this thing is that there's a distinction between masks that are clearly designed to protect yourself, right? Like hard plastic face shield style masks, and masks that have expressive ability, like a Guy Fawkes mask, right, or some giant headpiece. So there might be some, there are distinctions to think about here for sure. And I think finally it's worth saying that whenever people are in conflict, as happens at a protest, I don't know the best way to say it. I think it's difficult all the way around. And some of the stuff that you're talking about is absolutely real. I get that. Some of the things that the police department are talking about is absolutely real, because when people show up geared up to fight, right, it moves the needle closer to violence than they would otherwise. And of course, the police departments, I think, would tell you that their goal is to make sure that any protest that happens, it can be loud, it can be boisterous, it can be nasty, but as long as it's not violent, they're happy. And when people show up ready to fight, it gets violent faster. So lots of angles to this thing that need to be worked out. Thanks.
Chairman Corvée.
If I may, just to Representative Knight, I would agree with what you said, as far as the fact that, as I said earlier with my opening statement, that there probably is going to be some tweaking to this bill to make the intent more precise and more clear, so there's less abuse. So I would agree with you. In fact, as I was looking over my notes, which I hadn't looked over since we did the research on the bill, I saw a couple of things I'd like to add so I can pare it down a little bit. But as I said in my opening statements, I am not adverse to trying to make this a better bill, to more clearly define the intent.